Time is running out. Can this police canine dog stop the deadly chemical leak before it's too late? Officer Rachel Simmons and her canine partner, Ace, uncover a deadly chemical leak at a factory, leading them into a race against time. Trapped inside with armed mercenaries and a countdown to disaster, they must navigate the factory's deadly secrets. With the clock ticking, Rachel and Ace face life-threatening obstacles to prevent a catastrophic explosion. Will they escape in time, or will the factory's deadly plot consume them? The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Officer Rachel Simmons and her partner, Ace, a strong and agile canine dog, arrived at the factory. Ace had been with Rachel for 2 years, and together they had become a well-known team, respected for their sharp instincts and quick actions. Today, however, things felt different. There was a strange weight in the air, one that Ace seemed to sense before anyone else. The factory before them stood tall and quiet, with thick clouds of smoke rising from its chimneys. Its walls were old and weathered, but it had been operating for years, mostly under the radar. Workers had been complaining about odd smells and strange sounds coming from the building, and some even whispered about rumors of dangerous chemicals being used inside. Rachel had heard about these complaints, but never took them too seriously until now. "We need to find out what's going on," Rachel said as she opened the door of the patrol car and stepped out. Ace, with his dark, intelligent eyes, immediately sniffed the air, his ears standing tall. Rachel noticed him stiffen, his nose twitching. They approached the factory cautiously, passing by the rusty gates. Ace was unusually alert, his body tense. He didn't like this place. It wasn't just the smells, there was something more to it, something he couldn't quite explain. Inside the factory, the sound of machines running echoed in the distance. The workers went about their business, some pausing to glance at the two newcomers, but none spoke. The factory was quieter than usual, with workers moving quickly, eyes shifting nervously. Rachel glanced around. Everything seemed normal, but something felt off. "Ace, check it out," Rachel ordered, and Ace immediately went to work, sniffing the air and moving through the aisles. His movements were fast and precise as he went from one corner to the next. Rachel followed, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Ace stopped suddenly, his nose high in the air. He stood perfectly still for a moment, then began pacing in circles, barking once. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a normal alert. Something was wrong. "Ace?" Rachel's voice was firm but filled with concern. She bent down, keeping her eyes locked on her dog. "What is it, boy?" Ace started barking more forcefully, his movements erratic, his paws scraping against the concrete floor. He was agitated, more than usual. Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. She'd seen Ace react this way only a handful of times, when there was danger, when his instincts told him that something was terribly wrong. The factory's manager, a tall man with a sharp suit and a forced smile, walked over. "What's the problem, Officer Simmons?" he asked, his voice smooth but with a hint of irritation. "Ace is reacting to something," Rachel said, standing up and glancing at the manager. "There's something in the air. It's not right." The manager waved her off. "Oh, that's just the usual chemical smell. Nothing to worry about. We've had reports like this before, but it's nothing serious. Just the way things are around here." Rachel didn't believe him. She knew Ace's instincts never failed, and this wasn't the first time she had heard about strange things happening inside the factory. She looked at Ace, who was now pacing back and forth, his anxiety building. His ears were flat against his head, and his tail was tucked. Rachel trusted him. Something was definitely wrong. Ignoring the manager's protests, Rachel signaled for Ace to lead the way. They started moving deeper into the factory, passing rows of machines and workers. Ace's behavior grew more intense with each step. His paws tapped against the floor as if he was following a scent, but the air was thick and Rachel couldn't pick up anything. Suddenly, Ace stopped in front of a large storage room, its door slightly ajar. He growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the crack in the door. Rachel approached cautiously, her hand resting on her gun, just in case. She motioned for the manager to follow them, but he hesitated, his face turning pale. "Nothing to see here, officer," the manager said, his voice more strained now. "Please, leave it alone." Rachel's gaze never wavered. "Open it." With a deep breath, the manager reluctantly complied, swinging the door open. Inside, the room was filled with large barrels marked with strange symbols. Rachel didn't know what the symbols meant, but she didn't need to. The air inside was thick with a harsh, chemical smell that made her throat burn. Ace moved closer to one of the barrels, his body low to the ground. He barked once, then looked up at Rachel, his eyes wide with warning. Rachel knelt down beside him, her heart racing. There was no denying it now. This was no ordinary chemical storage room. This was something far more dangerous. Before Rachel could say another word, a loud alarm sounded across the factory. The factory gates started closing, and workers scrambled to secure areas. The manager's face went white, and he motioned for Rachel to leave. "This is a mistake, Officer Simmons. You need to go now." Rachel wasn't backing down. She grabbed her radio, her voice firm. "We've got a problem here. I need backup." The tension in the air was thick, and Rachel could feel it growing with each passing second. The manager's eyes flicked nervously around the room, his hands shaking. He knew something Rachel didn't, and it wasn't just the chemicals. "Ace, get back," Rachel ordered as the canine dog's agitation grew stronger. He backed away from the barrels, eyes locked on the manager, who was now looking for an escape. The factory was hiding something, and Rachel was going to find out what. "Ace, stay close," Rachel commanded, her voice sharp. She could see the manager's discomfort, but he wasn't moving to explain anything. Instead, he stood there, his arms folded tightly across his chest. Something about his stillness felt wrong. The factory walls felt suddenly smaller, the hum of the machinery echoing louder, like a ticking clock. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "What are you hiding?" The manager hesitated, then forced a smile. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. There's no problem here." Before Rachel could respond, Ace barked once, louder than before, his body stiff and alert. Rachel's heart skipped. The dog's behavior had changed, and so had the air in the room. Something was off, and now it was obvious. The manager's pale face confirmed it. Without warning, Ace started toward the far corner of the room. Rachel followed, her boots clicking against the concrete floor as she hurried after him. The manager stepped forward, his hand reaching out, as if to stop her. "Please, officer, I assure you." But Rachel wasn't listening. She was too focused on Ace, who had stopped in front of a set of large metal doors, his nose wrinkling at the air. He barked sharply and pawed at the door with his front paws. Rachel moved closer, her eyes scanning the room. There was something here, hidden behind those doors. She gestured toward the manager. "Open it." The manager stepped back, visibly sweating now. His eyes darted nervously toward the door, then back to Rachel. "You don't need to go in there," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "There's nothing." Rachel took a step forward, her hand on her radio. "Open the door, now." Reluctantly, the manager reached for the door handle. It creaked as he turned it, and Rachel stepped inside. The smell was immediate, stronger, sharper, and far worse than anything she had expected. Ace's behavior became even more frantic. He barked twice in quick succession and began pacing back and forth. Rachel took a deep breath, scanning the room. Large barrels lined the walls, some marked with labels she didn't recognize. The air was thick with an acrid scent, and her eyes began to water. This wasn't just a chemical spill, this was something far worse. Ace's sharp senses had pinpointed it before anyone else. She had to act fast. "Get back," Rachel ordered Ace, who was now pushing his nose up to one of the barrels. She approached the container, eyeing the label, which was partially obscured by dirt and grime. The writing was in a language she didn't understand, but she could make out one word: dangerous. "That's it. We're leaving." Rachel turned to the manager, who was standing frozen in the doorway. He opened his mouth to protest, but Rachel raised a hand. "I'm not asking. We need to evacuate the workers. Now." The manager's expression darkened. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." Before he could finish, a loud metallic sound echoed through the factory. Rachel's attention snapped to the far end of the building, where she could see several workers standing near a large, locked gate. The alarm lights flickered on, and the factory's massive machinery ground to a halt, the sound ringing throughout the room. "Go!" Rachel shouted, her voice strong, commanding. She ran toward the workers, motioning for them to follow. Ace, sensing the rising danger, stayed close to her, growling softly as they moved. As they approached the gate, Rachel reached for the door, only to find it locked. The factory's lockdown procedure was in full swing, and the workers were being corralled into smaller sections of the building. Panic was starting to spread. "Ace, get ready," Rachel said. "We need to move fast." With his nose to the ground, Ace led the way, moving toward a narrow hallway behind the storage room. Rachel followed, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what was happening. The manager's behavior, the strange chemicals, the sealed-off areas, it was all beginning to make sense. This wasn't a simple chemical spill. It was a cover-up. "Ace, lead us out," Rachel said, her voice low. The dog trotted ahead, sniffing the air, his pace steady and determined. Rachel felt a growing sense of urgency. There was more to this factory than met the eye, and now she was deep in it, with no way out unless she figured out what was really going on. As Ace moved further down the hallway, Rachel noticed a small door on the left side, slightly ajar. She gestured to Ace to stop. "What is it, boy?" Ace barked once and pushed the door open with his nose. The small room was filled with shelves, but what caught Rachel's eye was the large, red button on the wall labeled Emergency Shutdown. Her mind raced. This could be the key to stopping whatever was happening. She reached for the button, but as her hand hovered over it, a voice behind her froze her in place. "No!" the manager shouted, his voice panicked. "You don't know what you're doing. You can't just..." Rachel didn't wait to hear the rest. She slammed her hand down on the button, and the lights in the factory flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. The alarm continued to blare, but now there was a sense of finality to it. Rachel turned to Ace. "We need to get to the exit, fast." The dog barked in response, already moving ahead, guiding her through the maze of hallways. They had to get out of the building before it was too late, but as they approached the exit, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway behind them. Rachel turned sharply, her heart sinking. Someone was following them. Her mind raced, but she didn't pause for a second. She motioned for Ace to speed up, his body darting ahead as he led her through the winding corridors. The factory's low hum now felt like a warning. Every turn, every corner felt tighter as the pressure from the situation mounted. Rachel knew they were running out of time. If they didn't make it to the exit soon, everyone inside would be in serious danger. The sound of footsteps behind them was growing louder. Rachel's hand tightened around her gun, ready to face whatever threat might be closing in. She couldn't let anyone stop them now. Ace's movements were quick and confident, his keen nose guiding them through the twists and turns with precision. He knew where they were headed, but Rachel wasn't entirely sure. They needed to get to the main valve controlling the chemical flow, and fast. "Ace, let's go," Rachel urged, her voice low but commanding. They took another turn, and then the hallway opened up to a large, high-ceilinged chamber. The scent of chemicals was heavier here, and the walls seemed to close in on them. Rachel's eyes scanned the room quickly. There was no time for hesitation. Suddenly, Ace stopped, his body tense. Rachel followed his gaze and saw a large steel door at the far end of the room. It was secured with a combination lock, and just beyond it, she could make out the outline of what appeared to be the valve controls. But standing between them and the valve were several armed mercenaries. They were pacing back and forth, keeping a sharp lookout. Rachel could see the cold gleam of their rifles in the dim light. This was going to be tricky. Ace growled softly, his fur standing on end as he lowered his body, ready to spring into action. Rachel knew they couldn't afford to be seen. She looked around, searching for a way to approach without being caught. "Stay close," she whispered to Ace. Rachel crept to the side of the room, moving from cover to cover as Ace followed closely behind. Her eyes darted to the mercenaries, calculating their movements. They were too focused on the main door to notice her, but she knew it wouldn't take long for them to spot her if she wasn't careful. The countdown in her head was constant. Time was running out. The ticking clock of impending disaster was all Rachel could hear. If they didn't stop the chemical flow soon, the entire factory could go up in flames. Ace suddenly barked, breaking the silence. Rachel's heart skipped, and she spun around to see one of the mercenaries turning in their direction. Without thinking, Rachel moved, leaping into a crouch behind an old storage crate just in time. The mercenary began to walk toward them, rifle raised, scanning the shadows. Rachel held her breath, her eyes locked on the man. She could hear his footsteps growing closer, the tension thick in the air. Her hand rested on the hilt of her gun, ready to act if it came to that. But just as the mercenary came around the corner, Ace sprang into action. The dog lunged forward, knocking the man off balance, and Rachel didn't hesitate. She moved fast, disarming the mercenary with a swift maneuver, knocking him to the ground. Before he could react, she had secured him, pinning him down. "Ace, go," she said, her voice low but urgent. Ace darted ahead, his movements swift and precise as he moved past the incapacitated mercenary and toward the valve controls. Rachel followed, her eyes scanning the rest of the room. They had to move faster. Rachel reached the steel door, but the combination lock posed another problem. She looked around for any tools that could help, but the room was bare. Time was slipping away. She had only one choice. She pulled out her phone and activated the security bypass system she had installed in case of situations like this. Her fingers flew across the screen as she quickly entered the bypass code. A soft beep confirmed that the door was unlocked. "Ace, get ready," she said as the door clicked open. They slipped inside, and Rachel's eyes immediately locked onto the valve controls. It was a complex system, high-tech and heavily secured, but it wasn't beyond her skill. She kneeled down and began to work quickly, the clock ticking louder in her ears. But just as she was about to disable the system, the door behind them slammed open. Rachel's head snapped around, and her eyes widened as the factory's leader walked in, a cold smirk on his face. He was not alone. 2 armed guards flanked him. "Not so fast, Officer Simmons," the man said, his voice smooth, calculated. Rachel's pulse quickened. She recognized him. He wasn't just the factory's manager. He was part of a much larger criminal operation, a syndicate working for someone with enough power to erase all traces of what was really happening here. "You've made a big mistake," the man continued, his smile widening. "You don't realize just how big." Rachel's eyes flicked to the valve controls. They were moments away from triggering a catastrophic explosion, and now she was facing this man, standing between her and the only way to stop it. But she wasn't backing down. "You don't get to decide how this ends," Rachel said, her voice steady. The man's expression soured, and he motioned for his guards to step forward. "You should have stayed out of it." Rachel's hand moved to her gun, but Ace barked, interrupting her. The dog launched himself forward, darting between the guards and Rachel, causing them to stumble back. It was now or never. Rachel made her move. In a matter of seconds, she had the security system disabled, and the valve controls were in her hands. The chemical flow stopped, but just as she thought they were safe, a loud noise erupted from behind her. The factory's security forces were on the move, and the explosion countdown was still ticking. But Rachel wasn't backing down. She used every ounce of her training to stay one step ahead. With Ace guiding her through the factory, they made their way to the emergency exit. Just as they neared it, the building trembled from the pressure of the chemicals. But Rachel and Ace were determined. They burst through the door and into the open air, narrowly avoiding the blast as the chemical leak was neutralized in a series of controlled explosions. They were Safetha's time, but the mastermind behind the operation was still out there.